Hey guys, so last week we started our new series, Small Space, Big Garden. And I'm gonna have all of the videos in this series linked into one playlist. So I'll put that link down below. So I debated on having this video first or a little bit later in the series. And I chose now because I think you need to think ahead about where or how you're gonna water your containers. And you're gonna need to think about that in some cases before you set all your containers up. So that's what today's video is about. It's about the different ways that you can water containers and the best ways of doing that and how to do each one. So here's my small space garden so far. These 2x4s kind of lay it out. It's 7 by 14 feet. I did give the hedge a nice haircut. And so far I've just got the one green stalk set up. I am gonna be setting another one up in the corner, the other corner. And this one has the automatic watering system. So that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't have to explain how to water this. If you don't have the watering system, then you just take your hose and fill that up every couple of days. And it waters the entire tower for you. So the subject of watering might seem simple to you. It seems simple to me, but only because I've been doing it for a long time. But it's probably one of the most asked questions I get, especially about containers. The good news is there's more than one right way to do it, and you just have to find the way that fits your schedule, fits your life, and that you just like doing. So first things first, why is the subject of watering in containers so important? And why is it different than watering in the ground? Well, first of all, when you are watering in the ground or when you're growing in the ground, plants have an infinite amount of space that they can stretch their legs, or in this case, their roots. And so if you don't water enough, they can send their roots out deeper where the ground is more moist. In a pot, they can't do that. They are kind of stuck, literally, in one spot, and they can't send their roots any further than that pot. So you, as the gardener, are pretty much 100% responsible for watering them, especially if you live in a dry summer climate like me. Now, if you get rain, you don't have to worry about it quite so much. In your situation, it might be too much water and you'll be overwatering things, but we'll get into all that. Containers also dry out faster than in the ground. It's just the way it is. So it's gonna mean more frequent watering, especially in things like terracotta. And by the way, anytime that building has been in the back of the last few videos, I've had people asking if that's my house or the house across the street. Well, it's neither. It's actually home to my lucky chickens. Terracotta looks great, but it is very porous. And so you're gonna find yourself watering terracotta a lot more than other types. Now there's things you can do with terracotta. They have a food safe sealant that you can paint on the inside of terracotta pots, which basically stops it from being so porous, which I'm gonna actually do to all my terracotta pots this summer once I've got the spring stuff out of them. You can also double pot with terracotta, meaning use the terracotta as the pretty outside and then just stick a plastic pot right inside that just kind of barely fits inside and plant in that. Now I'm gonna be using a lot of plastic pots, terracotta pots, probably some metal pots like galvanized tubs, and I'm gonna be using a lot of fabric pots. Now, a few years ago, I never would have said that, ever. Because in my climate, like I mentioned, zero rain from well, we're having rain tomorrow. So like the end of May all the way through to almost November, it's not surprising if we get zero rain during that whole time. And so typically, fabric pots would not be something I would want in this climate. Even though there are so many advantages to fabric pots, they breathe well, they root prune. We'll get into all that on another video. But because they're made of fabric and breathe well, that's the problem. They dry out really quickly. However, I happened to come across a brand a few years ago that changed all that. That's Grassroots, and this is not a sponsored video. However, I'm going to be using a lot of their stuff. I've been using their pots and their raised beds for many years, probably four or 5 years. I think it was the year before I got to this property, but they have what's called a living soil pot. The magic of this pot is it takes advantage of root pruning that happens. Root pruning is basically when a root is in a plastic pot, and you've probably all seen this at the garden center. If you pull it out and it's been growing in that pot a while, the roots just wrap around and around and around, and that can just strangle the plant and be the end of it in some cases. So root pruning is when the roots hit the inside edge of a fabric pot, or some people call them grow bags. It actually prunes them. So if you're thinking about, let's say, how we prune any other plant, if you pinch out the top of that plant, what happens? It puts out side branches, right? The same thing happens with roots. So when the root gets to the edge of this pot, it basically prunes it and it splits it, and it sends the hormones back through the root to put out more side roots. So you get a much better root distribution in your pot. The problem always was they would dry out. They would heat up, they would dry out, especially along the edges. But with these living soil pots, only the bottom 3 inches, you can see in there, are fabric only. That allows the root pruning to happen in the bottom 3 inches where it needs it most. But the rest of it has this waterproof liner that is non-toxic, plant safe, food safe, all that stuff. So it keeps the moisture in the pot. So you get to take advantage of the root pruning with less watering. I do have a discount code for the grassroots fabric pots and raised beds. I'll probably have one of those in here as well. I'll leave that code down below. So with all these different types of pots, it's really important that you get a watering strategy dialed in right here from the very beginning of the season. So the first way to water is the obvious way to water. It's the way most people water and have for however long, and that's just by hand. Got to turn it on first. And that's just by hand. Now, when you're watering by hand, you need to know when to stop. And that's not necessarily just when the pot fills up to the top. It's actually when you start to see water coming out of the bottom of the pot. So when you see that, give it a few more seconds, then move on to the next pot. Now this method is great if you have a smaller garden, like I'm gonna have here. And if you have a good memory and can remember to do it on the regular basis that it needs to happen. And that regular basis is different depending on your climate, the type of pot. It's something you're gonna have to kind of experiment with. And the best way to do that is with your finger. Just take your finger and bury it down in the soil about 2 to 3 inches. If it feels dry, it's time to water. If it feels moist, let it be, even if the top looks dry. Now the second way to water is where fabric pots or grow bags really shine. And that is by using bottom watering with a reservoir of some kind. Now I've seen people use all kinds of things. One would be at Home Depot or Lowe's or any of the big box home improvement stores. They have, I don't know if they're about 3 feet by 4 feet. They're containers to mix cement in. You could fit, 2 pots this size, maybe 4 smaller pots. I've also seen people use a kiddie pool, like from Walmart. I don't know how much they cost, but the blue ones that you get in the summer, and they basically last one summer before your kids break them. You can fit quite a few pots in one of those. And the idea is you fill that reservoir about 2 inches with water and keep that 1 to 2 inches filled up at all times. What happens is they can take water in, but they can also breathe at the same time. So if you were to put a plastic pot with just a few drain holes at the bottom, they would have no way to breathe except for those holes that you've now covered up with water. So in essence, you're drowning your plants. But with breathable fabric pots, that doesn't happen. So as long as you can look and see there's water in that reservoir, you don't have to water. The pots will soak that water in right up through the potting soil, and that will always keep your potting soil the perfect amount of moistness. dampness. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You can even get saucers that are just a little bit bigger than the pot itself, and put one under each of these. And this whole bottom watering method is perfect if you live on a balcony. Why? Because you're never going to have water coming out the bottom of the pots and over the edge of the balcony onto your neighbor below. Now, here's where the first and second way work together. If you chose the first way to hand water and you forget that you have plants to water for like a week or two, I don't know who's done that. And then once you remember, you see the plant drooping and you notice that the soil in that pot is 100% dry as a bone. What you're gonna find is when you go to water by hand again, that entire column of potting soil has now shrunk. And there's gonna be openings all around the edge between the potting soil and the pot. And when you water, it's just going to run right down the sides and out the holes. That's not something you want. That's not something the neighbor below you wants either. That soil is now what we call hydrophobic. And there's only one good way of actually returning the moisture to a hydrophobic pot. And that is by submersing that pot into some type of reservoir and keeping it there for an hour, 2 hours, until you can see that 100% of that pot is now back to being moist. So it's always nice, even if you're not doing the reservoir bottom watering method, it's always nice to just keep something handy that you can set a pot in case you happen to forget once, twice, a lot of times. And because I've done that, I've forgotten a lot of times, I resort to the third way of doing it. And that is by having every container that I have on drip irrigation. Now don't turn off the video. It is, I know because I hear from so many of you, and because I used to think the same thing. I thought it was so intimidating. How do you hook it up? How long do you let it run? How many can you have on one line? There's a lot of questions. Most of them don't really matter, I found out. Now I've done lots of videos. I did a great one last year. You guys loved it. I went from A to Z on putting in a whole new garden with drip. So if you want to see it done from the very beginning, I'll leave that video link down in the description of this video. However, very quickly, I will show you how to hook up a container to drip. It's super easy. So starting here at the spigot with a timer, the tube goes under the gravel through the herb garden. Don't look, it's overgrown. Although look at this time. It's some of the best time I've ever had. You might say the time of my life. Anyway, so it comes out of the gravel right here, down the wall, and in this planter that holds the hedge, and then across and around. So I can tap into that. I just dig these leaves out of the way. You can see here's the tube right here. This is the 1/2 inch supply line. Now again, you have to have that supply line near your container garden, and that's what the link down below is for, to show you how to hook that very first part up. So how do you get from that supply line to the actual pot? We've got an adapter like this. One end pokes into the supply line, and one end goes into this, which is the 1/4 inch supply tube. Now, usually the supply tube is black, not brown. I don't even know where I got this, but anyway, it works just the same. So we're gonna take this piece and push it in there, like that. Then we're gonna use a tool like this or something similar to make a hole like that. And then we're gonna push this into that hole, just like that. So now if this is the pot we're going to grow in, you could fill it up with soil and then just run the tube into here. But then you got tubes running everywhere and it just doesn't look tidy. So what I do is kind of measure the tube, how long I need it, cut it off, put this tube through one of the side drain holes, and pull it up. Now we can just fill the pot with soil. Be careful not to lose the tube. There it is. Now the second type of tube, which isn't always brown, but most of the time it is our emitter tube. And they have emitter tubes that are spaced between emitters. See the emitter right here? This one happens to be spaced every 6 inches. They have 8 inches and they have 12 inches. I like the 6-inch. So you need one more of these. I'm just gonna put it on just like that. And then hook the emitter tube onto that. Just like that. Then we need a couple landscape staples, and yours may not be the expensive type like mine that have this beautiful rusty patina. I'm gonna staple it down right there where it connects. And then you want a couple of spirals. In this size pot, you just want it about like that. So we're gonna cut this here. And then we have this, which is a little bit different. This just goes into the end and plugs it up. So it stops that line. So staple it down again. And then you can plant your plant right there in the middle. Now, just so you know, a lot of people will ask about companion planting. You know, I wrote the book on it. And I do have container ideas in this book. But if you want to know what companions go well with all the different things you're planting, check out our planting calculator and garden guide. You can go to whatever type of plant you want to grow and it will tell you what companions are good for that. Now in containers, you don't have to have the companion plant growing in the same container. You can have a pot right next to it. So if we plant a tomato in this pot here, I'll stick a pot of basil next to it. Now comes the question everybody asks. How often do I turn the water on? Well, first of all, I would get a timer because we already said you're doing this because you can't remember to turn a hose on when it's necessary, like me, no shame. So I'd get a timer so you never have to worry about it. However, for the first couple of weeks, you need to maybe have that on, depending on your weather. You know, give it a try, coming on every 2 to 3 days for about 5 minutes. Now, it is easier when you're starting out. If you have like this supply tube that also waters this hedge, if you're new to this, I would persuade you to have a supply tube that is specifically for the pots in your container garden. Because then it's much easier to know these are all pots. They're all getting about the same amount of water, whereas this hedge needs a little bit more water, so I might put less emitters into the pot. But you don't have to worry about all that if you just have that one supply line just for all the pots in this area and not for anything in the ground. That way, all of them are going to have about the same amount of moisture. And then check every couple of days, make sure that it's not drying out. If it seems way too wet, then move it to every 3 days or 4 days. If it seems too dry, then you can either run it longer, maybe another minute or two every other day, or maybe the same amount of time every day. It might sound like a lot of information, but most of it, once you get in here and start working with it, it's going to be common sense. I'm telling you, it is. I've heard from, so you can look at that video down below that I linked for the whole drip system. Just look at the comments in that video of so many people who said, you know what, I thought this was going to be overwhelming and above my pay grade, but I did it. It was simple. Because it is. So which of these methods is right for you? I think you should probably already know because all three of them are very different. But if you enjoy being hands-on, if it gives you a reason to be out here with your plants, just to stand there with the hose and water them, then by all means do that. At my last house, I had our tropical garden, and for the first couple of years, I just actually enjoyed the experience of being out there and watering everything by hand. Those hot summer days and kind of feeling that mist of the hose, it was just something I enjoyed until I started hating it. And then I went with drip for everything and I never looked back. If you're busy or forgetful or just want everything no muss, no fuss, take the time to set up a drip system in the beginning and it will save you so much time, energy, and headaches. And I have to say, unless you are really precise and remembering to get out there and water every couple of days, your plants are going to thrive a lot more on drip. Plus, if you live in a humid climate, drip delivers the water to the soil and not to the leaves, where if you're watering by hand, you're probably gonna get it on some leaves, and that can cause disease. So I know which one I would do, but you gotta pick yours for yourself. Now, one more way to save water when you are growing in containers, and most people don't think of this. In fact, most people don't do this in the ground, even though you should, but in pots, this works just as well, and that is by mulching the top of your pots. And you can use anything. You can use pine shavings. In my citrus, I have just some gravel over the top of it, and it just, especially the gravel, it reflects the sunlight back, so it keeps the pot inside cooler, and it keeps the weeds from coming up, and it keeps the moisture in. So don't forget to mulch, whether you're growing in ground or here in your container garden. All right, so I needed to get all this out of the way so that you know from the beginning, setting up your container garden, which way you're gonna water, because especially if you're doing drip like you saw, that really should be done right at the beginning so you can put those drip tubes up through the bottom and you don't have like a tangle of tubes going everywhere. It just looks a lot more neat and tidy and someplace that you're gonna wanna sit and relax. I hope you're enjoying this series. Let me know down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.